Just recently, UFOB, one of the YouTube channels that I follow, that I tell everyone about, that's really good. It has a lot of good stuff on there. They posted something on Twitter. It was an old article from November 14th, 1865, in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle from Brooklyn, New York. And this article is unbelievable. It was about something strange that crashed in the Rocky Mountains back in the 1860s. Imagine. It says here, remarkable phenomenon, a piece of the moon found in the Rocky Mountains. And this was actually an article that they had received that originally appeared in the St. Louis Democrat. So here it says, Mr. James Lumley, an old Rocky Mountain trapper who has been stopping at the Everett House for several days, makes a most remarkable statement to us, and one which, if authenticated, will produce the greatest excitement in the scientific world. Mr. Lumley states that about the middle of last September he was engaged in trapping in the mountains about 75 miles or 100 miles above the great falls of the Upper Missouri, and in the neighborhood of what is known as the Cadet Pass. Just after sunset one evening, he beheld a bright luminous body in the heavens which was moving with great rapidity in an easterly direction. It was plainly visible for at least 5 seconds when it suddenly separated into particles resembling, as Mr. Lumley describes it, the bursting of a skyrocket in the air. A few minutes later he heard a heavy explosion which jarred the earth very perceptibly, and this was shortly after followed by a rushing sound like a tornado rushing through the forest. A strong wind sprang up about the same time, but suddenly subsided. The air was also filled with a peculiar odor of a sulfurous character. These incidents would have made but slight impression on the mind of Mr. Lumley, but for the fact that the ensuing day he discovered at a distance of about 2 miles from his camping place that, so far as he could see in either direction, a path had been cut through the forest several rods wide, giant trees uprooted or broken off near the ground, the tops of hills shaved off, and the earth plowed up in many places. Great and widespread havoc was everywhere visible. Following up this track of desolation, he soon ascertained the cause of it in the shape of an immense stone that had been driven into the side of a mountain. But now comes the most remarkable part of the story. An examination of this stone, or so much of it as was visible, showed that it had been divided into compartments, and that in various places it was carved with the curious hieroglyphics. More than this, Mr. Lumley also discovered fragments of a substance resembling glass, and here and there dark stains as though caused by a liquid. He is confident that the hieroglyphics were the work of human hands, and that the stone itself, although but a fragment of an immense body, must have been used for some purpose by animated beings. Strange as this story may appear, Mr. Lumley relates it with so much sincerity that we are forced to accept it as true. It is evident that the stone he discovered was a fragment of the meteor which was visible in this section in September last. It will be remembered that it was seen in Leavenworth in Galena and in the city by Colonel Boonville. At Leavenworth it was seen to separate in particles or explode. Astronomers have long held that it is probable that the heavenly bodies are inhabited, even the comets, and it may be that hereafter some future Columbus from Mercury or Uranus may land on this planet by means of a meteoric conveyance and take full possession thereof, as did the Spanish navigators of the New World in 1492, and eventually drive what is known as the human race into a condition of the most abject servitude. It has always been a favorite theory with many that there must be a race superior to us, and this may at some future time be demonstrated in the way we have indicated. Now that is very interesting. A very interesting article. The fact that this was something that somebody wrote in 1865. First off, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, was it a crashed flying saucer? Was it extraterrestrial? I mean, the guy's talking about hieroglyphics. Now he's describing it as stone, but maybe it was something that was maybe it was something like stone. I mean, who knows? I mean, is that what this trapper was talking about? Something like stone. But the reporter, whoever wrote this, now it doesn't have a name on here about who wrote this, but to suggest, like to have those suggestions that, any being from outer space would do the same thing that human beings do, and basically take control of the planet. Basically, it's amazing that people were actually thinking that way in 1865. That's something else. That even back then, some people were smart enough to see that that's a possibility. That anything that comes here, they might just want to colonize, and that's, your first thought, your first impression is usually the correct one. But I mean, I guess that was something that they had to think about at the time. And this guy's talking about something that crashed into the side of a mountain into it was a big thing, and there was hieroglyphics on it. I mean, for one thing, let's face it, there's no meteor, right, or anything like that that's going to have hieroglyphics on it. I mean, it must have been some sort of craft. If there's hieroglyphics on it, obviously it had to be some sort of craft. But it's a very interesting story. It seems like this stuff, it's very possible that it's been happening the whole time we've been here. Who knows how long things have been, here, other beings besides human beings. Who knows how long they've been watching us, or how many different kinds have come here. Who knows? It's probably countless. We probably wouldn't believe it if we were told. And that's not the only other one. There was another interesting thing that allegedly happened in 1941 in Cape Girardeau in Missouri. Again, I don't know. I mean, the difference between stories like this one and things like Roswell is that there's just so much more. There were a lot of witnesses. I mean, really, this one here really lacks witnesses. And that's one of the problems with this story. So it's really, really hard. Even though I think it's possible, and if it really did happen, well, that opens another can of worms, and we'll talk about that. Anyway, it says, here's an article. I'll leave the link for it. It was in a publication called southeastarrow.com. It says 6 years before the Roswell UFO incident, Reverend William Huffman from the Red Star Baptist Church was called by the sheriff around 9:30 p.m. and taken to the scene of an accident so he could read the victim's last rites. According to Michael Huntington, local travel writer and UFO researcher, Huffman found himself praying over 3 extraterrestrial beings after their flying saucers struck ground in rural Cape Girardeau field. The story of the UFO crash has been long research since the 80s, when Charlotte Mann, a former Cape Girardeau resident, told the story about what her grandfather experienced 40 years prior. According to Huntington, Huffman was taken to a field where a group of firemen, police officers, and eventually the military were taking over the scene. Upon arrival, it was a very different situation. It was not a conventional aircraft as we know it. He described it as a saucer that was metallic in color, no seams, did not look like anything he had ever seen. It had been broken up in one portion, and so he could walk up and see that, Mann said in a TV documentary about the crash. The crash did not just feature the UFO, though. There were also some bodies, 3 gray alien-type beings, about 5 feet tall, big heads, and big black eyes, Huntington said. There were said to be 3 aliens, 2 dead, but one seemed to still be alive. This is the one Huffman performed his duties on first. When Huffman was finished, he was sworn to secrecy by the military personnel who had taken over the area. According to UFO casebook files, with the United States on the verge of entering World War II, anyone on the site was sworn to secrecy as a concern for national security. Not only were eyewitnesses sworn to secrecy, but research leads to believe that the military also removed all evidence that ever happened. Like all crash stories like this, the military came and took everything away, hushed everybody to secrecy, and took the materials away to who knows where, Huntington said. Usually the Wright-Patterson Airport base in Dayton, Ohio is the place they took that stuff within folklore, and it's covered up. I just want to stop here for a second. Now, so, there's this idea that so if this happened, if this is real, like, again, there's just not enough witnesses here, but it does sound like it's something that could have happened, the way it's described. But you have to wonder, in 1941, at that time, where America was about to get involved in the war, and if something like strange like this happened, it would be hard to believe at first that it's aliens. It might take time to come to that kind of determination. Even if like this priest who went there and was asked to do the last rites on these beings, right? Even if he looked at them and in his mind he didn't think they were human, that doesn't mean that the military officials at the time are going to look at these and just think right off the bat that they must be from outer space, or have that thought right away. I just don't know if people in 1941 would have known that these would even thought that these things could have been from outer space, right, at that time. Like, that might not have been even entered their mind. For all they know, their first thought probably would have been in 1941, the way things were going, the way war was really starting to rage over there in Europe, right? And we're also having to deal with Japan. The way things were going, I think the first thought is that this must be some sort of trick or something to scare us from Japan or Germany or something. That could have been what the thought was at first, because this would have been very difficult in 1941 at that time to think otherwise, because at that time, it was a scary time. It was unknown which direction the world was about to take. I mean, had the Nazis and Japanese won, and I mean, who knows what the world would be like right now. So I think at that time in 1941, I just don't know if they might have just dismissed it at the time. Like, they might not even, like, at that time, United States officials might have totally dismissed it, put it off to the side, not even thought about it. Because what are they going to do? And not only that, even their scientists would have a hard time coming to the conclusion that this is extraterrestrial. But then I would think, say that was something that was kept top secret from 1941. Nobody concerned themselves about it. There was no, the way it sounds here, it sounds like the ship was so just beat up that there was no way to try to reverse engineer it. They probably didn't even think of that at first, if this is true. But, maybe it was just something that was forgotten, put away, just like at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark when they put away the stuff. So at the time in 1941, all that stuff was just put away and they thought that it could have been some sort of trick caused by one of these people from Europe, one of these countries from Europe trying to play games, or maybe the Japanese. And this is really, we're not seeing beings from another world. We're seeing manipulated human beings of some sort, or, that could have been the initial thought. It might have taken a long time for anybody within the government to come to that conclusion that it was extraterrestrial at that time. I think in 1947, it would have been a different story, because here again, the war had ended. United States came out on top. I mean, nobody else was in any position to come up with any kind of new technology like that. Right. And so the United States knew it wasn't them. And then so now, oh yeah, this ain't from any other country. This is extraterrestrial. The people who handled it originally, that 1941 case, if it did happen, might not have thought it was that important. They might have treated it the same way that the people in 1897 Aurora, Texas treated the crash. Right, not that big of a deal. I mean, what are you going to do? We won't tell anybody, though. It's not something people want to talk about, or maybe we don't even want to know about, So they just, threw it away and forgot about it, and there was really nothing done about it because we were busy with the war. We were busy with the war then. So, I mean, if it did happen, who knows? I don't know. I mean, I'll leave a link to this article. I mean, it's interesting, and there's a lot of articles out there. In fact, there's some books, at least one book out there that I want to get. I have to get around to buying that book and reading it. This is a story that does really interest me. But again, I don't know if it's, there's just not as enough evidence for it as there is with something like Roswell. Actually, I think there's actually more evidence with the Aurora case. In my mind, actually has more evidence. I mean, there was actually some people with the Aurora, Texas 1897 case in 1973 when people, reporters realized about, understood that, this story, that this is something that, people say happened. When they started interviewing people, some of them, I know there was at least one guy that had been a young kid at the time and remembered the event happening and how people were talking. So there was a lot of other people who were interviewed over the years, who, they, as far as they were concerned, yeah, the people that they knew said, yeah, it was something that really happened. It really happened. And a lot when they were kids, they would always run up, to the cemetery to look at the grave of the man from space, So, yeah, I think that there's more evidence with regard to the Aurora one than there is to this Missouri 1941, but it just doesn't mean it didn't happen. I just don't know. Again, I think the most evidence that you could find is for the Roswell incident, because there was just so many witnesses who, went on the record. So, but yeah, there have been crashes obviously before. There's probably tons of crashes that have happened over the centuries, actually, that we just don't know about, and we'll never know about. And I'm sure there'll be crashes in the future. And so one of these times, one of these crashes might turn out to be might turn out to be how disclosure comes about. That's very possible.